There's no specific scripture we're going to look at today. We have a number of them that we'll consider. Most of them are pretty familiar to you, thankfully, so that'll be good. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin the first in a 9-part series on the whole of who we are. And so I'm going to kind of, right off the bat, explain to you how this is going to work, so there's no surprises, even though I love surprising you. But I want to just put you at ease, okay? So this is my 9-week strategy, starting now. First of all, there's going to be explanation and exposition. So the 9 sermons that we'll be dealing with over this next 9 weeks will engage with the scriptures in an attempt to form for us a surprising Christian imagination, which is a phrase we use a lot here now, a surprising Christian imagination around the topic of discipleship is one way you can talk about it, or another way you could say it is following Jesus. Another way you could say it is good humanity. In my mind, all of those are kind of synonymous. So you could think of this series of sermons as being about what it means to be a good human. You could think about it as what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, or what it means to follow Jesus. And so we're gonna look at what it looks like to follow Jesus as a whole person. That's the uniqueness of these next 8 to 9 weeks. We're going to look at 8 parts of who we are. So there'll be 8 sermons, and this one's the overview. Okay, so that's why there's 9. That's why I say 8 to 9, because the first one is just setting you up for the next 8 weeks, where we're going to look at specific aspects of the whole of who we are. So that's the first part of the strategy. The second part of the strategy is inspiration. We're going to use all kinds of different means. Art. We're going to use art. We're going to use music. We're going to use quotes. In fact, I even encourage you, I carry with me in my bag a little quote book. So if I hear a good quote or I read a good quote, it goes in the book, okay? And so if you don't have one of these, you might need one for this series, because I'm going to be hitting you with a lot of good quotes. Not only in my sermons, but in our midweek encouragement times. We might be posting new ones on the website. One of my favorite quotes of all times that goes very nicely with this sermon series is on our new website on the page that says imagination. So I'm not going to tell you what it is. That's for you to discover. This is the inspiring part. See, I'm pulling you in. So we're going to try to inspire you in this whole person project that we're going to be talking about with art, music, quotes, and other creative avenues. Those little business cards, those are little creative avenues, capturing our imagination, challenging our minds, cultivating our hearts. And there'll be a lot of good midweek encouragement material coming your way. So if you haven't yet signed up for our midweek encouragement email, please sign up for it, at least for this 9-week series. I do want to make mention of one thing in regards to the inspiration of this and just cultivating one aspect of our hearts. We're going to use art very strategically. And this particular art, this painting here, is done by an artist, an Italian artist, that we'll be using his works for each one of our different 8 parts of the whole of who we are. So you'll be seeing a lot of the art of Giuliano Cucco. He's Italian, so I'm not actually sure if that's how you pronounce his name. It could possibly be Giuliano Suso, but I'm going to pronounce it Giuliano Cucco because that's what it looks like. I know Cucco sounds weird, but I almost feel like I heard somebody pronounce it like that, so I'm going with that. But he passed away in 2006, but he was an accomplished, versatile artist who did all kinds of different, he did oil paintings, photography, sculpture, poetry, pastels. He has little satirical cartoons he does, kind of blasting the clergy, which I am clergy, so I can laugh at myself. So some of them are just hilarious. He has other evocative, like, drawings and pen drawings he does of the Gospels. So I think you're going to enjoy these paintings of his that kind of connect with this theme of whole person well-being, which is the theme for the next 9 weeks. So explanation from the scriptures, inspiration, and then conversation. We want to have interviews with people who have had experience with some of these aspects of who we are. And so if one of these, and as I send out our midweek encouragement, I'll explain to you the 8 parts. I'll talk about it today for a little bit. But if one of those really hits you, like I've really thought a lot, and I've had a lot of hardship or experienced growth in this particular area, come talk to me about that, because I might want to interview you and send that out for our midweek encouragement, that interview with you, or even have you come on Sunday and do an interview. So I'd like to have dialogue and discussion, and that it's not just me that's talking all the time, but we're hearing from people who have worked through these realms that we're going to be discussing. And then the final thing in the strategy for the next 9 weeks is practices. So in each sermon, we're going to have specific practices I'm going to encourage you to employ in your life. They might be daily practices or weekly practices or monthly practices or an annual practice of some sort for ongoing renewal in the whole of who we are. So here's the big warning. I'm warning you right now. I don't want to chase any of you away who are newer to our church or perhaps are guests, but there will be homework for this series. I apologize right up front, but it's just how it's got to be. So I really want what we're talking about here to bleed into the fabric of our everyday lives. And so I'm going to give you some specific homework to practice in your everyday lives. For example, when we talk about the mind, the intellectual self, maybe the practice I'll encourage you is to read at least one really good book every 6 months. Like, that seems like a lot. No, it's not. One book every 6 months. And it can't be any book. A really good book that helps to challenge and form your mind. I'm not saying that's going to be the homework, but it could be. And thankfully, we have book clubs already set up for that. So for that one, that's no problem. For the story talk, when we talk about the kind of idea of who we are, it might be that I encourage you to talk to a therapist or a trusted friend or a spiritual director about some aspect of your life, some aspect of your story or history that you need to actually take some time to work through. When we talk about the heart, I might ask you to examine your heart, the state of your weekly kind of vibe of your inner self on a weekly basis. I'm just kind of giving you examples. For your body, I might ask you to count your steps on your phone or get some nutrition counseling or eat a vegetable at least once a month. I don't know. But the point is, there will be homework and you will like it, just like vegetables. That's the strategy. Now let's kind of unpack some of the questions that kind of make up the framework for this series. The first question is, why do we need whole person well-being renewal? Why is this topic a big deal to me? Because I chose this topic. Actually, our worship team helped me choose it, but I have a passion for this specific topic, have been thinking about it for a long time, and the question is why? Why do we need to talk about whole person renewal? And I think there's a number of answers. One of them is that we got trouble in our culture. And whenever I say we got trouble, I have to do the bit again. You got trouble, folks. Right here in Pittsfield City. Trouble with a capital T, and it rhymes with C, and that stands for culture. It doesn't ring as much, does it, as pool? But anyway, I don't know. I have that inner music man in me that wants to come out. So our culture, there's good things about our culture. Is that true, yes or no? Yes. And then there's some problems with our culture. Is that true, yes or no? Yes. And so it's important for us to identify what some of those problems or tendencies are, especially as we're talking about whole person renewal. So some of the problems that are kind of cultural norms that tend to hurt us or hinder us in some way, I'm going to mention some of them. And this is why whole person renewal is so important, because of these normalized problems in our culture. One of them would be a superficiality problem, where the outside is what matters most. Our social media self has been carefully curated, and this is not something that goes away when we come to church. I remember many years ago, my parents were traveling ministers. My dad was a traveling minister, and so we traveled all across the country. And so one of the things we did all across the country as we were traveling to churches all over North America, we stopped at the malls of North America, because my mother liked a good deal. So she would go bargain shopping in the malls across North America. So we had 5 boys in my family. What do you think the last thing we wanted to do on a Saturday was? Shopping at a mall. Like, somebody, just take me out. So all of us were like, no, another mall. And so we would go to these shopping malls. And so my dad was a nice guy. And so he came up with games to entertain us while Mom was shopping. And so he had games where he'd like roll quarters down the mall floors and onto the squares and, that stuff like that. But one of our favorite ones was mannequin posing. And that is where you would just go into a store with a mannequin, in the front, and then you just kind of stand by it and kind of pose. And then people would kind of walk by and be like, so try it sometime. It's quite entertaining. But that, as funny as that is in the mall, it's not as funny in the church, but it tends to be what we do, and you can laugh because it's the reality. It happens. Like, we all kind of put on our, at least I have my tie on. I put my tie on, and, we come in, and how's it going? Everything's great. Yeah, great. Hey, fine. Yeah, we shake hands, and But we could be dying inside. It could have been the worst week of our life, but we feel like we have to be something, some kind of superficial, spiritual version of who we are here. And I want to say to you, that's a problem. And it's partly our culture, it's partly the religious culture that we've cultivated in our churches, but it's a problem. We need a vision for following Jesus that goes below the surface. We need a new strategy for how to do this. It's like an iceberg. You only see 10% of it. Where's the rest of it? It's the 90% below. And that's the reality. And so we need to swap that a little bit. And we need to start here. So that's why this matters. Another problem we have in our culture, we'll call it a fragmentation problem. We tend to focus on certain aspects of our lives while overlooking critical components of who we are. So we tend to divide, this is just an example, our secular self from our sacred self, the everyday version of ourself from our spiritual self. In our churches, this can kind of be cultivated as a kind of a hypocrisy. That's a problem. But this comes from our broader cultural problem of dividing these things out instead of seeing it all as intertwined, as woven together. I could say more on that, but we'll come up with more for that later. But the next one is the individualistic problem, which I'm sure you're familiar with. In our culture, we've been conditioned to think and act in terms of our own personal happiness as being the only thing that should matter. My personal happiness matters more than anything else in the world. And this is cultivated in almost every Disney movie. Not busting on Disney. I'm just saying this is just the air we breathe. Every American Idol season. I'm not busting on these things. If you like, that's my favorite show, that's fine. Great. I'm just saying everything, every billboard, every commercial, the air we breathe is individualism. It's all about the person's primary happiness as being the ultimate thing in life. And I'm just here to tell you, that's a problem. It's a big problem. And maybe you'll see that more as we walk through this series. We have a meaninglessness problem. We don't have a robust story to root our lives in, so we often get disenchanted with our lives, our relationships, our work, our habits, with no hope for purpose. There's literally individuals who are writing books and doing podcasts, and they're making good money talking about the meaning crisis in our culture. They say there's this epidemic of meaninglessness. And I'm like, they're exactly right. So we need a new strategy, a new story, a new ultimate purpose vision. There's also an immediacy problem in our culture. That is, we want everything fast and now. It's kind of like that fast food life experience. But the Christian life, the whole person vision of well-being is a long-term, patient project. And so we need a new vision of what that looks like. where every day matters in this long obedience in the same direction, as the writer Eugene Peterson describes it. And then the last problem is what I'm just going to call a settling problem. And that is, in our culture, it's okay to just kind of settle for all the brokenness around us. Because we come to the point where, what are we supposed to do about it? There's this lack of resistance when we reach the breaking point of hopelessness. And so I think we need a new vision of what transformation looks like. What does growth for a follower of Jesus actually look like on the ground on Monday morning? What does that look like? What would it look like for me to look back on my life a year later and to see real growth take place? To see myself as a better human, more like Jesus. Wouldn't that be awesome if a year from now we can look back at our year ago selves and we say, wow, what a loser. No, not what a loser, but man, look at how I've grown. Wouldn't that be awesome? Did you know that's how it's supposed to be? So we need a new vision, how to get there. So that's what we're doing here. That's why this sermon series. Hopefully we can at least in some ways answer all those problems or craft a new vision to meet those problems in our culture and in our church culture. So I want to just say this, though. What does it look like to be part of this whole person well-being renewal project? What would it look like if you're like, I'm in? Okay, if you're like, I'm on board for this. I want the whole of who I am to be in this renewal process. Well, here's what it would look like for you. It's a serious project. You have to be serious about it. Who you are, what you do, the scope of your involvement in whatever you're involved in actually matters, because it's not just you. Since you're connected in a web of relationships, the drama you're playing out in your life impacts so many different people. So it's serious business. So we dare not waste our lives, because our lives, every single one of you, your life matters significantly. And nobody gets off on this one. Every single person in this building, your life matters. So that means this whole person well-being project you're on is really serious. So that would be the first thing you'd like, okay, this is serious business. Well, another thing that if you're going to be a part of this, if you're like, I'm in this whole person renewal project, you have to realize it's a humble project. The complexity and diversity of the human experience should cause us to approach this project with a lot of care, caution, and compassion. This is a challenging project that we're engaged in, because we're all different. We all have different histories and ways of thinking and gifts and abilities and resources. And so we come to this project humbly. And so I'm going to be the first one to say right up front, I don't have all the answers on this. Then what are you doing talking up there? No, I'm just being honest. I don't. But I've been wrestling with this, and I hope you'll join me in wrestling humbly with this project. But it's also a hopeful project. It's a serious project, a humble project, and a hopeful project. It's hopeful because we can keep growing. We're supposed to keep growing and bearing fruit and engaging in a story that has a really cool ending. So it's hopeful. And if I can, over the next 9 weeks, I'm going to infuse all the hope I possibly can in you. And then the last thing is a happy project. The reality that we are part of this bigger plot, this bigger story, that just our little lives, our little existence is a part of something bigger, brings a kind of like joy that we're in on this. And it gives purpose, joy to our lives. So it's a happy project. And so I want to encourage you to take this complex, interconnected, whole person deal we're engaging with seriously. It matters to God. It matters to how we're being formed in a local church. It matters to our community. It matters to our families. And so let's humbly, seriously, happily, hopefully engage in this together. So let me just say this also up front. Remember, this is all introduction. So I'm not going to get into the thick of it today, okay? But this is all really important. So I have decided to break the whole of who you are down into 8 parts. That's my decision because I'm the preacher. If you have a problem with that, see me after church. No, I'm just saying, but here's my deal. You can break it down however you like. There's all different people have broken it down in different ways. So you can look at the whole of who you are from different angles. Here, and I'm going to give you some of them in case you're like, I like those better. That's fine. So you can look at the whole of who we are as being me, others, and God. That's one way. That's like one angle. Myself, other people, and God. That's a pretty good vision, okay, of a holistic vision. You can look at it as body, soul, and spirit as you look at the inner self of who you are. So you can look at it from the inner self and the outer self. You can look at it from more like action, like the things we do, and then contemplation, what happens internally. They're just different people in different places have broken it down in different ways. You can look at it in 5 parts: physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual. That's a pretty common way of looking at the whole of who we are. There's an actual thing called the whole person model as a kind of behavior change model that is used in different situations, businesses, counseling sessions. And that is mindset and behaviors and outcomes. You kind of break it down into mindset, the way we think about ourselves, the behaviors that result from that, and the outcomes of it on a broader level. So you can kind of capture this in different ways. When you look at the medical world, they have different ways of understanding whole person ideas and frameworks. And one of the medical groups that I was researching said this: to help a person become as healthy as possible, they must be addressed as a whole person, which consists of at least 3 other aspects besides the body, because that's what medicine's primarily concerned about, your body, right? But they're saying, if you just fix the body, that's not enough. This is like medical thinking people saying this. They say behavior and lifestyle, social and emotional well-being, and mental and spiritual health. These are doctors saying we can fix their body, but they're actually not doing well still. Why is that? Because there's these other facets that make up who we are. And if we don't address those, we're not actually going to offer whole person well-being. They say these various categories affect physical and mental health and influence the meaning and purpose a person finds in life. They almost talk like they're talking like a pastor, right? They're talking about purpose in life and meaning. Those are more philosophical or religious conceptions. But they're on to something, aren't they? So I have decided to break it down into 8 parts. And here's my 8 parts. And we'll talk through one each Sunday so we can kind of sit with it a little bit. The first one is the mythical self. That's our story. We'll talk about your story and the story you think you're in and the story you are in and how to understand that story as a driving force of everything else we do. And then we'll talk about the affectional self. That's our heart. Affections. It's kind of an older term that we don't use as much anymore. There's a lot of talk about emotions. I'm not primarily focusing on that. I'm talking about the desires in us, the longings that we have, our heart. The ancient people, the Israelites, they talked about it as the gut. The Hebrew word they use is the gut. It's the inner core of who we are, where we long and desire things, our heart. The next one we'll talk about is the intellectual self. You know what that one is, the mind. Talk about how we think, how that affects the whole of who we are. And then one week we'll talk about the physical self. That's what? Our bodies. Our bodies. We will talk about that. You say, why are you talking about the body in church? Because we're embodied people. It's not just about our hearts or our spirits. It's about the whole of who we are, and our body matters to God. So we're going to talk about our bodies. Then we're going to talk about the moral self, our character. The habits that we form that make us the kind of people we are as we move out into the world. We're going to talk about the spiritual self. We're going to talk about God, like our spirits in connection to God. What is that? Why is that so important? And then we're going to talk about the relational self, people. how our relationship with other people affects the whole of who we are. And then finally, on the last of this 9-week series, we'll talk about the vocational self, our work. And I don't just mean our jobs, I mean our work. What are we supposed to do in this world as human beings if we're following Jesus? So those are the 8. Like I said, if you don't like them, tough. No. That's what we're doing, and we can argue later about if that is the full picture. There's pieces that you'll notice that are missing a little bit. The emotions aren't mentioned here, but they're connected to our the emotions are connected to our bodies and our heart and our mind. They're interconnected. They're kind of weaving back and forth in all of them. So that's why they're missing. You also may notice the will isn't mentioned. Well, that's because our character is a lot about our will. It's the choices that we put into place. So our character and our will kind of go hand in hand. So hopefully I'm covering the whole basis as much as I can. So here's the scriptures we're going to use to kind of set up our way of thinking. I have a few more minutes, so here's the scriptures. I'm not going to go through these. These are ones I think will be somewhat familiar to you, and we'll come back to them as we walk through the next 8 weeks. I'm just going to list them for you now. The first one that will challenge our conception of ourselves is Deuteronomy 6 in conjunction with Luke 10:27. And if I tell you what this is, you already know it. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That little phrase that Jesus reiterates from the ancient people's conception of what their job is as they are covenant people of God, as he reiterates that in the New Testament, I like the Luke version because he mentions it in Matthew and Mark, but in Luke I like how he says it because he includes with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. I like how he divides it in that particular in the Lucan version of it, because it's a whole person way of understanding our task. And the goal of it all, of course, is love. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so if you find yourself on this project we're going to call whole person well-being, if you're struggling to find your footing, the best thing you can do is just find a big bullseye with love on it and go that way. And you'll know you're at least going in the right direction. Because that's the end game, is love. Love for God and love for others. Another text that we will kind of keep as the framework is Colossians 1:10-20, which talks about the wholeness, the universalness of Christ as the fullness of all things. The text actually says, in him all things hold together. Isn't that crazy? That's staggering language. Literally every DNA on this planet, every part of everything you see and experience is held together by the glory that is Christ. That takes your breath away. So we're gonna keep that because that helps us to understand that all things are interconnected. And so if you lose your way on this journey of whole person well-being, I would encourage you just to look for the hidden power of Christ in all things because he's holding everything together anyway. Another one we'll look at is Matthew 7:16. Jesus said, you will know them by their, anybody know? You'll know them by their what? Fruit, by their fruit. We'd expect him to say, you will know them by their work. But that's not what Jesus says. You will know them by the fruit of their life. What they produce in their life, the fruit of their life, tells us a lot about what's going on in the iceberg of their heart, down in the deeper level of the interior us. And so we'll keep that as a part of our framework. And then Psalm 1:3 talks about a tree being planted by living waters, and I love that imagery because the tree is you. The tree is a person. So I love the imagery of you plant your life by these streams of water, and if you do this, your leaves won't wither, and your fruit will produce in season, which is a picture of a flourishing life. And the point of Psalm 1 is that if you go God's good way, it produces a whole person flourishing. And that's what we're after. So I love this imagery. So the way so this is, by the way, homework number 1. You take a pad. These are like my favorite. Yellow pads are like my favorite thing after coffee and basketball, but and after my wife, number one. Exactly. God, wife, coffee. Silas. I'm gonna get in trouble. There's no way I can get out. Okay. So you take a pad. This is homework, by the way. Mm-hmm. You take a pad of paper and you draw a tree. Everybody can draw a tree. Well, I hope. There's my tree. Not very impressive, but it's a tree. You put some fruit on that tree. Okay, there's my fruit. It's kind of like that game that you used to play as kids with the little cherries. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. Yeah, Cheerio. Thank you. Hi-ho, Cheerio. So that's what that is. That's fruit. Then you put a line for some soil, and then you're going to put roots, right? You got to have roots. And then you're going to put some critters, ants, because we have ants in our house right now. And then you're going to put a little animal that's half dog, half rabbit, half squirrel, I don't know. And then you're going to put some outer elements of like sun, clouds, wind. Did we get everything? Yes, well, okay, there you go. So that's the hidden element. We're going to put it in the background. Thank you. Okay, so you got the water, because we're planted by a stream of water. And then the last thing you're going to do is make sure you see some of the branches in there a little bit. So what you're going to do, you're going to take this image, we're kind of lifting it out of Psalm 1, and we're using it to understand the whole of who we are. So as we go in the series, I will tell you which one of these represents these 8 things. Because the reason I said all 8 of these elements is because each one represents one of these 8 components of who we are. And so it's important that you keep this beautiful drawing I have just drawn in your mind, or do a better one for yourself, for your own sake. But that is your homework for this week, because we're going to keep coming back to that image from Psalm 1:3, because we want to see what it looks like for that tree that is you to flourish. The last one is Genesis 1-2. We're going to talk about how God creates all things good. We'll come back to that, especially when we talk about our body and our work. We'll focus on Genesis 1 and 2. And that's it. That's our introduction. But I'm going to close out with this. How do we do this together? How do we kind of make steps in the right? How shall we then live together? Okay. Here's how we approach these 8 weeks, not counting today. We approach them with a willingness to lean into the wisdom of Scriptures. So we're going to lean into, I think God probably knows how we can flourish like this tree in the best way. And he even rung the bell to let us know that either I am done or he just wants you to know that this is absolutely true, because that was not planned. So we're going to lean into the Scriptures because he knows best in this way. And then we're going to try to have a balanced vision of a whole person. We're going to try to connect all the dots. And then we're going to do this together. You don't have to do this on your own. This is the good news. I'm not saying, hey, you, do this on your own, in your own time, in private, in a closet, don't tell me about it. No, I'm asking us to do this together. So have you ever seen the redwood trees? Did you know that these redwoods that can grow over 300 feet, 1,200 years old, do you know that they have little roots? They don't have big roots like normal trees that have like roots, twice the size of the tree. They have small roots, but the cool thing is they don't go deep, but they go out. And in fact, they go so far out that they intertwine with all the other trees. So the system of stability actually isn't based on just themselves. It's interconnected with all these other massive trees. I think that's a pretty good vision of what church should be. So we're going to send our roots out, and we're going to interconnect with each other and have conversations and encourage each other in this whole person well-being project. And then the final thing we're going to do is we're going to pray. We're going to pray prayers of whole person well-being together. Now, if you're a creative person, you like to write, I encourage you, write your own whole person well-being prayer. And share it with me or share it with each other. We'll have one that we'll do as a church starting next week together. Each week, we'll pray a prayer of whole person well-being together, but I'd love to see some new prayers, some whole person prayers written by people from our own church that we can pray and we can use in our own asking God to do this work of worship and formation in us. And with that, I am officially done with the introduction. Praise the Lord. The bells need not ring anymore. So my invitation this morning is simple. You're invited to offer your whole self to the Lord, knowing that He knows the way to a meaningful life and genuine human flourishing. And so all I'm asking you to do is just offer yourself to the Lord in that way. It doesn't require some big emotional moment. It just requires a serious, humble, hopeful step forward of, Lord, I want to be renewed as a whole person. I don't care if you're 15 or 105. This is what it means to follow Jesus. It means to keep growing and to be transformed to the image of Jesus as a whole person. So I want to ask you to join us in this project. So here's my benediction, my prayer for you. May we recognize the ongoing results of the mighty resurrection of Christ in the everyday challenges of our life this week. And may we discover the whole of who we are caught up in the new creation renewal of the kingdom of God.